When you walk down a quiet American suburban street at night, there's this incredible, almost instinctive sense of safety.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Like you look at those houses, you see the warm light glowing behind the drawn curtains, maybe the flicker of a TV screen, and your brain just automatically fills in the blanks with absolute normalcy.
Right. You picture people cooking dinner or folding laundry or, I don't know, arguing about what to watch on Netflix.
Exactly. It's comforting. I mean, we rely really heavily on that illusion, but then you pull back the curtain on the case we're analyzing today, and that comforting picture just totally shatters.
It really does, because you start to realize that behind any of those perfectly painted front doors, a psychological pressure cooker could be, actively building toward a devastating rupture.
Yeah, and that's our mission today. We are doing a deep dive into a case that terrified a community and basically captured the entire nation's attention. I'm talking about the murder of Debbie Wood.
Mm.
We're going to be analyzing the mechanics of this case using the detailed forensic and psychological accounts from the book The Poisoned Heart, the Wood-Love Triangle Murder.
And, this isn't just a look at the mechanics of a crime. It's really an examination of how a perfectly ordinary life can be violently derailed by a calculated, deadly love triangle.
Right. And to really grasp the magnitude of that derailment, we have to look past the yellow crime tape,
Yeah.
right? We have to focus on the anatomy of the betrayal itself.
Exactly. Because we're dealing with a slow, methodical replacement of love with manipulation. It's a psychological progression that requires just a profound level of deception.
So to understand how that happens, let's start by establishing the baseline. Like, what was the environment before the disruption occurred?
Well, that baseline really starts with Debbie Wood herself. The sources paint a very clear, very consistent picture of who she was.
Yeah, she wasn't someone living on the edge or taking massive interpersonal risks. Her friends, her coworkers, they universally highlighted three core traits, which were that she was kind, caring, and above all, deeply loyal.
Mm-hmm. And she lived with her longtime partner, and their daily routine was remarkably unremarkable.
Right, they went to work, they maintained their home. They were just, another piece of the suburban fabric.
But loyalty as a psychological trait, well, it creates a massive vulnerability when the dynamic of a relationship quietly shifts.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, there's a concept in psychology often referred to as betrayal blindness.
Betrayal blindness, okay.
Yeah, when a person's core operating principle is loyalty, their brain actively resists processing information that contradicts the safety of their primary relationship.
Oh, wow. So they just ignore the red flags.
Basically, yeah. They default to trust because the idea that their partner is actively deceiving them is just too cognitively painful to accept.
That makes so much sense. And the disruption in this home didn't just announce itself over a loudspeaker. It was the introduction of another woman, not just as a passing encounter, but as this sustained secret affair.
Great. And that fundamentally alters the geometry of the household. You go from a partnership built on shared reality to a deadly triangle built entirely on sustained deception.
I think about that deception like carbon monoxide in a house.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Thanks. Yeah, it's colorless, it's odorless, and from the outside, the house looks completely fine. But inside, that toxic gas is slowly replacing the oxygen.
And the victim is becoming incapacitated, but because there's no smoke and no fire, they don't even realize they're being poisoned until they can barely function.
Exactly. The sources detail how these whispered rumors of cheating and secret meetings began to circulate, and we know they escalated into these intense, toxic, emotional arguments.
They did, yeah.
So how do we get from a hidden text message to an environment where the oxygen is entirely depleted?
Well, what's fascinating here is the sheer cognitive load required to maintain that secret. I mean, for the partner having the affair, they're suddenly managing two conflicting realities.
Right. They have to remember what lies they told, to whom, and when they told them.
Exactly. And that mental exhaustion shows up as extreme defensiveness and paranoia. And then for the other woman, the psychological tension stems from being hidden.
Like from the desire to legitimize the relationship and, eliminate the primary partner.
Yes. And for Debbie, even with that betrayal blindness we talked about, the body still registers the carbon monoxide. She might not have seen the actual texts, but she would have felt the behavioral shifts.
Like the sudden irritability, the unexplained absences.
The gaslighting, yeah.
And that is where the kindness and loyalty get weaponized, don't they?
Mm.
The manipulator uses Debbie's loyalty to keep her anchored to the house while simultaneously undermining her sanity to protect the secret.
Right. It's structural gaslighting.
Structural gaslighting.
Wow. And that structural gaslighting inevitably leads to the emotional breakdowns and the threats that are mentioned in the sources. The human brain just cannot indefinitely sustain the tension of two conflicting realities.
So the deception begins to unravel.
Exactly. And the dynamic transitions from a covert affair to an actively hostile, toxic relationship. The pressure of the lies just becomes too heavy for the structure to bear.
But a toxic pressure cooker like that fundamentally cannot stay behind closed doors forever. Like it has to vent or it has to explode.
It has to explode, and that brings us to the timeline of the escalation.
Right. The sources emphasize that these weren't just random, isolated arguments. This was weeks of mounting tension, a sustained, agonizing buildup.
Until it finally snapped. On a specific, brutally cold evening when Debbie disappeared entirely without warning.
The timeline is so wild here.
It's the most critical piece of the forensic puzzle, honestly. We have to separate the concept of a sudden snap from a predictable escalation. When a person whose baseline behavior is defined by routine and loyalty suddenly vanishes, the absence of action is just as glaring as a physical attack.
Yeah, let's put ourselves in the shoes of her family on that cold evening. You know her routines, you know she always checks in, and suddenly there's just a void.
Yeah.
The text describes the immediate aftermath as this visceral, creeping dread. The family starts making phone calls. One call goes to voicemail, then another, then a dozen.
Just think about that rising panic, the stark contrast between a completely normal Tuesday night, expecting a loved one to walk through the door, expecting a text back, and the sudden, terrifying silence.
That silence is what signals that the carbon monoxide is finally ignited.
Yeah. For the family, those unanswered calls were the definitive red flags. It bypassed any rationalization and prompted immediate police involvement.
And the dread was tragically validated just hours later. When the police located the scene, the level of violence they discovered was extraordinary. The sources note that it shocked even deeply experienced detectives. And we are talking about professionals whose entire career is built on processing the darkest parts of human behavior. To shock them, the scene has to transcend typical domestic violence.
It really does. The nature of a crime scene often acts as a mirror reflecting the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator.
So the extreme brutality here immediately pointed investigators inward.
Exactly. Towards someone who knew her intimately.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. We hear this phrase thrown around constantly in society and the media when violence occurs between partners. A crime of passion.
Ugh, yes, we hear that a lot.
Right. The narrative implies that an argument just tragically spiraled out of control, like a split-second loss of judgment. But if we look at the psychological load we just discussed, the weeks of escalating arguments, the paranoia, the careful management of a secret life, can we really call this a sudden explosion of anger?
No, not at all.
Or are we looking at an entirely different mechanism?
We are absolutely looking at a different mechanism, and challenging that crime of passion narrative is essential here. The phrase itself almost serves as an excuse,
Yeah, suggesting the perpetrator was momentarily overwhelmed by love or emotion.
Right. But sustaining a love triangle requires hyper-rationality and immense control. The sources explicitly document a history of violent confrontations leading up to the murder.
So this wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Exactly. The brutality at the scene wasn't an abandonment of control. It was the ultimate horrific assertion of it. It's the climax of a deeply toxic cycle that had been building momentum.
So it's really the difference between a tragic accident of circumstance and a targeted execution.
Precisely. And recognizing that difference changes the entire trajectory of the investigation.
Because if it's a targeted execution, there's a plan.
Right. And if there is a plan, there is a trail. The horrifying scene the detectives found was merely the physical manifestation of the crime.
So to prove premeditation, to prove that this wasn't just a domestic dispute gone wrong, investigators had to look at the invisible infrastructure of the murder.
They had to look at what the perpetrators desperately tried to erase.
Which means diving headfirst into the digital ecosystem.
Oh, absolutely.
The detectives didn't just stay at the physical crime scene. They started pulling the digital threads of these three individuals. This is where the mechanics of modern police work completely dismantled the illusion of the perfect crime.
They really did. They utilized specific forensic tools to uncover hidden text messages flying between the partner and the other woman.
Yeah, and they mapped out secret phone calls using cell tower pings, and they retrieved messages that the killers believed they had permanently deleted.
Which is such a common mistake people make.
Totally. I think when the average person hits delete on a text message, they picture tossing a piece of paper into a fire. They think it's just incinerated.
Right, but that is a very common, and in this case, fatal misconception. Digital storage doesn't work like fire at all. It works much more like a massive library card catalog.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Well, when you delete a text message or a photo, your phone's operating system doesn't take the time to run back into the memory stacks, find the data, and shred it.
Because that would take too long.
Yeah, that requires way too much processing power and slows the device down. Instead, the phone simply removes the index card from the catalog. It basically tells the system, hey, the physical space where this text message lives is now available for new data to be written over it.
So the book is still sitting on the shelf. The phone just forgot where it put it.
Exactly. Until you download a massive new app or record a long video that physically overwrites that exact sector of the flash memory, the original data remains entirely intact.
Wow. And the police have ways to get that back.
Oh, yeah. Forensic extraction tools don't use the card catalog. They bypass the phone's operating system entirely and read the raw data directly off the memory chips.
They pull the books right off the hidden shelf.
Still got it.
You have to wonder, looking at this, in an era where our phones track our steps, our heart rates, our locations down to the meter, is it actually possible to hide weeks of premeditated rage?
It's a great question.
Like, can anyone actively plan a murder while living in the modern world and not leave a digital fingerprint?
The forensic reality suggests it is nearly impossible. And this points to a specific psychological phenomenon we see in perpetrators of premeditated intimate crimes, which is tunnel vision.
Tunnel vision.
Yeah. The obsession with their goal, which in this case was eliminating the primary partner to legitimize the affair, it narrows their focus so severely that they lose awareness of the broader surveillance environment.
Oh, they just believe their actions exist in a vacuum.
Exactly. But every deleted text, every burner phone call, every coordinated movement caught on a distant neighbor's doorbell camera, they are all behavioral artifacts.
They're breadcrumbs.
Yes, breadcrumbs.
And those specific breadcrumbs expose the absolute truth behind the triangle. The retrieved messages and the surveillance footage proved that the perpetrators actively coordinated their stories, like they planned the timeline.
Right. And the effort they put into covering their tracks is what legally and psychologically proved their awareness of guilt.
The hidden calls and deleted texts were just mechanisms of narrative control. They wanted to orchestrate the aftermath just as tightly as they orchestrated the affair itself.
But the digital forensics shattered that control, providing prosecutors with just a minute-by-minute timeline of how the betrayal metastasized into physical violence.
And that undeniable digital timeline, eventually paired with those shocking confessions, forced this entire case out of the quiet clinical environment of the detective squad room.
It did. It dragged the reality of what happened behind that suburban door into the brutal, glaring light of the courtroom.
Yeah. And this is where the abstract concept of a murder becomes a devastating human reality for the family and eventually for the entire nation watching.
Because the courtroom is where the psychological underpinnings of the crime are forced onto the public record, the prosecutors didn't just lay out the forensic timeline, you know?
Right. They presented the underlying architecture of the motive. Their core argument basically dismantled any lingering idea of a crime of passion.
Exactly. They presented a case driven strictly and coldly by jealousy and control.
And the sources describe the emotional toll of that trial, and man, it is heavy. You have family members sitting in the gallery, separated by just a few feet of wood for the people who literally sat at their dinner tables.
It's unimaginable.
The testimony forced them to listen to the granular, horrific details of Debbie's final moments. They had to watch the evidence physically demonstrate how rapidly a relationship built on supposed care had transformed into a calculated elimination.
Yeah. And the grief in that room wasn't just for the physical loss of a life.
No. What else was it?
Well, it's a dual grief. There is the mourning of the death, obviously, but then there is the profound trauma of the betrayal itself.
Right. To realize that someone you loved, someone who slept under your roof, was actively plotting your destruction with an outside party.
It fundamentally breaks the human capacity for trust.
It really does.
But what is equally vital to analyze about this case is its sociological footprint. I mean, this trial didn't remain a local tragedy.
No, it captured intense national attention across the United States. You had news networks providing wall-to-wall coverage, dubbing it one of the most disturbing love triangle murders in recent memory. So what does this all mean? Why are we as a society so uncomfortably captivated by these specific types of betrayals?
It's an interesting question.
Like, we see news about violence every single day, often on a much larger scale.
Mm-hmm.
Yet a targeted murder in a quiet, unassuming town brings the entire country to a standstill. Why do we fixate on the rotting foundation of someone else's house?
Well, if we view this through the lens of evolutionary psychology and social safety, the fixation actually makes complete sense.
Oh, really?
Yeah. For most people, this case is terrifying because it entirely destroys the safety of the ordinary. Human beings need to believe that danger is external.
Right. We want the threat to be a stranger in a dark alley, a masked intruder, something we can easily identify and lock our doors against.
It's the whole reason we build the house in the first place, to keep the danger on the outside.
Exactly.
But a case like Debbie Wood's forces the public to confront a far more destabilizing reality. The idea that the deepest, most lethal danger can originate from inside the house.
From the person sleeping right next to you.
Exactly. It violates the most basic social contract we have. So when people are obsessively consuming the details of the secret texts, the behavioral shifts, the emotional breakdowns, they aren't just being voyeurs.
They're scanning for threat indicators.
Yes. Subconsciously, they are asking themselves, what are the warning signs of intimate betrayal? Could I spot the carbon monoxide in my own home? Am I actually safe?
Wow. We are basically dissecting the tragedy to build our own psychological armor. We look at the extreme to understand the vulnerabilities in our own ordinary lives.
That's exactly it.
And that brings the gravity of this deep dive right back to you, the listener. The story of Debbie Wood, as chronicled in The Poisoned Heart, leaves us with a highly uncomfortable yet really necessary reminder.
It does.
You interact with neighbors, you chat with coworkers, you see the perfectly curated versions of their lives on the street and on social media. But behind those seemingly impenetrable, perfectly painted front doors, complex and sometimes dangerous dynamics can exist entirely unseen by the outside world.
It is a really sobering reminder of the limits of our perception. But, if there's a counterbalance to that dark reality, it's found in the very investigative tools that ultimately secured justice in this case.
Right, the unearthing of the cell tower data, the recovery of the supposedly deleted text messages, the piecing together of the digital footprint.
Yeah. And it leaves us with a critical, lingering question to ponder as we navigate our increasingly connected world.
What's that?
Well, in an age where every location ping, every late-night search, and every hidden message leaves an indelible mark on a flash memory chip somewhere, is the concept of a truly secret life entirely a relic of the past.
That is heavy.
Can anyone, no matter how methodical they believe they are, ever truly hide their darkest intentions behind closed doors anymore?
A fascinating and, honestly, slightly chilling thought experiment to take with you the next time you walk past those glowing windows on a quiet suburban street. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden mechanics of deception and justice. Keep questioning the ordinary, and we will catch you next time.